It's time for the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast.
Another week and another edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast. We have NFL news for you from Week 5. We got fantasy football files. We have playoff baseball, and we have so much more. Make sure you stay tuned. You don't want to miss this one.
I'm glad you connected. This is Dave Johnson, voice of the Washington Wizards. You have connected to the right place because you are listening to my man, Josh Kirby, on Sports Podcast.
Alrighty, back with you on another week, another episode of the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Josh Kirby. Yes, we're part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network. Make sure you find them on SoundCloud and www.mayoplease.com. We're also sponsored by Rat 11 Chips. Make sure you find yourself a bag today inside your local Martin's Food Line and Giant stores. We're also sponsored by PM Plus Reserves. As always, I want to thank MPT Now Productions, JR Beats Official, and Dave Johnson. As always, hope you all had a great week of sports, watching sports. We have a lot to dive into this week. NFL Week 5 action. I have a lot to talk about Week 5-wise. And I want to start off with the Los Angeles Rams. They've dropped 2 straight now to the Buccaneers and to the Seahawks. The Seahawks gave them a fight, and the Rams ended up losing this game by a point, 30-29. And you look at the production, there was no production on the ground for the Rams, and Jared Goff did not have the best game out there. Russell Wilson, he had 4 passing touchdowns. Ridiculous game for him. Ridiculous game on the ground for Chris Carson. It was amazing. I saw it go back and forth, and I was like, the Rams can't drop 2 games in a row, but they did. Is there a problem in L.A. With Sean McVay and all them? I don't think so. I don't want to say there is because Sean McVay is such a great coach. Took the Rams to the Super Bowl last year, as you know, losing to the Patriots. But the Rams are a good team. I don't want to push the panic button yet on the Los Angeles Rams because they could come back. They could adjust some play calling and stuff. Sean McVay is a good coach, and I think he will overcome this. I don't think you push the panic button yet on this Rams team. But Seattle, they're looking pretty good at 4-1, playing next week against, what was it? The Browns. We'll get into the Browns later, but they're playing next week against the Browns. Could be another win for them going into Week 6. More news I want to talk about. The Cardinals get their first win of the season against the Cincinnati Bengals. Kyler Murray just looks more and more comfortable in that Cardinals system. And the locker room just is staying true, just playing. There's no problem with the coaching staff or anything. Cliff Kingsbury, as you know, in his first year with the Cardinals, doesn't seem to be an issue, and they're just going to keep fighting, grinding out games. And they beat the Cincinnati Bengals 26-23. The Bengals still looking pretty young under their new head coach, Zach Taylor. There's a lot of promise I can see in the future with Zach Taylor coaching the Bengals, but it's just not looking like a good season for them this year. I mean, their run game against the Cardinals did not look good at all. And the Bengals are going to have a rebuilding year, as you know. Hopefully they can get some more picks in the draft. I'm assuming they're going to get a high top round draft pick, so hopefully they can go out, rebuild the team somehow. Andy Dalton, I just don't think he's getting the job done either for the Bengals, and it just went to show in this game. The Cardinals ended up beating them. So the Cardinals won 3-1 on the season. The Bengals are winless at 0-5. The Houston Texans looked pretty good against the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons I'm not sure what the deal is. I mean, I thought the Falcons would be at least a wild card team this year, but they're 1-4. And there's an issue with the Falcons, and the coaching staff needs to figure out what that issue is. Matt Ryan just does not look comfortable in his position, and the run game is not doing well. Devontae Freeman is underperforming by a lot from what I've seen so far for the Atlanta Falcons. There's a lot I could go and say into the Falcons, but there's something wrong. There's something that needs to be changed in the Falcons organization. Dan Quinn, he's still a great coach, but something's got to change with the Falcons in order for them to keep on winning. You see, Tampa Bay got another loss. New Orleans, with Teddy Bridgewater, still looks fantastic, 31-24 there. The Vikings looked pretty good against the Giants. Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook had themselves a game, 132 yards on the ground for Dalvin Cook. But the Vikings, they still look like an inconsistent football team that can win games that they should win, but when it's against a good team, they just can't seem to figure out what they're doing. So the Vikings are still inconsistent at 3-2, but they're in the right direction after that win. Chicago and Oakland in London. What a game that was, going back and forth. You thought the Bears were just gonna come away with it, it was. The Raiders were going to come away with it. It was 17-0. 17 points put up in the first two quarters. Then the Bears plop on 21 straight points in the third quarter. Then 7 more for the Raiders. Comes out 24-21. The Raiders win. John Gruden and the Raiders, they're looking pretty good. Khalil Mack facing his former team in London and the Chicago Bears. Bears 3-2, looking at Chase Daniel. He still looks like a pretty good quarterback in place of Mitch Trubisky, but the Bears are going to have to adapt the play calling a little bit, in my opinion, which I feel like they're going to do. It's still an adjustment with Chase Daniel, but he's looking pretty good. But Mitch Trubisky, I feel like he will be coming back in the near future, and then the Bears are just going to go back to their winning ways. But just a setback with Mitch Trubisky and the Chicago Bears, in my opinion, with Mitch Trubisky getting injured. But who knows? Bears 21, the Raiders 24. Another game, the Pittsburgh Steelers down to their third-string quarterback. Prayers up to Mason Rudolph in the concussion protocol. Gets knocked out cold during the Ravens game, and they come in with an undrafted Delvin Hodges out of Samford. So Delvin Hodges comes in for Mason Rudolph, who had 131 yards and a touchdown before getting knocked out cold. And the storyline from this game, in my opinion, is there was no penalty on that hit. So there was no penalty, and he gets knocked out cold, and he had to walk off the field too. So apparently he's home resting. He went to the hospital but got released. So luckily Mason Rudolph's all right. But the Steelers, they need to find a quarterback. Delvin Hodges, I'm not sure if he's going to get the job done. And with Big Ben out for the season, I think it's time for the Steelers to press the panic button here after this overtime loss to the Baltimore Ravens, 26-23. Lamar Jackson, not a spectacular game, throwing 3 interceptions in that ball game. The Steelers should have had it won, but with that injury to Mason Rudolph, I think the Ravens just found the will to win, and the Steelers with a young backup quarterback in Delvin Hodges, only 68 yards for the game. It's just going to come down to, can they find a good quarterback to pick up before the trade deadline? And I think the Steelers are definitely going to have to think about moving forward who is going to be their next leader at quarterback with Mason Rudolph injured. Hopefully it's not for that long. It looked like a serious injury from my standpoint, but I just think the Steelers are going to have to look for their future quarterback with Big Ben out. Who knows how long he's going to be there, and Mason Rudolph with that concussion. So another game I want to go into, the Green Bay Packers beating the Dallas Cowboys again. What's up with Dallas? I mean, Dallas looked spectacular their first 2 games of the season, and they come in against the Packers at home, and they lose by 10. Granted, they were down 14, 15, 17-0 going into halftime. Then they put up 10 and 14 in the third and fourth quarter, end up losing by 10. But they're getting blown out by Green Bay in the first 2 quarters of this game. And you wonder why Dak hasn't gotten an extension and Jason Garrett hasn't gotten an extension yet. So the Cowboys, I'm not saying they're a bad team because of this loss. I'm just saying they're sort of inconsistent. They're still inconsistent. And that's what's separating them from the Philadelphia Eagles in first place in the NFC East. And it's, I don't know. I mean, the Cowboys, I'm not saying they're going to struggle the rest of the year. They have the Jets coming up week 6. Then you got the Eagles week 7 on Sunday night. So one game that's not too bad, but a division game. Then you have week 8 for Dallas. I'm not sure who that was. I think it was, Yeah, they have a bye week 8. So they have a chance to possibly redeem themselves after that loss to Green Bay. But that division game against the Eagles, that's going to be a tough one. That's going to be a turning point for the Dallas Cowboys in their season, in my opinion. Other news and notes, I want to talk about the Browns, how they just looked atrocious in this ball game. Baker Mayfield throwing 2 interceptions. And if I were to tell you week 5 would end up having 2 undefeated teams, the New England Patriots and the San Francisco 49ers. If I told you that before the season began, would you have believed me? I wouldn't have believed myself. And the 49ers look pretty darn good. And they're getting run production out of Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman in that game. Like over 100 yards for Matt Breida and almost at 100 yards for Tevin Coleman. So the run production, Jimmy Garoppolo looks great. The 49ers are looking like a good team. And this is a sleeper team that could make their way into a wild card spot this year, in my opinion. The Browns, they're just inconsistent this year. They have the pieces. They just need to improve. They need to really improve. Baker's a good quarterback. You have Odell, you have Nick Chubb. You just got to give them some more experience. I mean, not Odell. He's been in the league with the Giants before, but you just got to get more experience. And Freddie Kitchens, he knows the system, but still, first-year head coach. They just got to find their identity, but the Browns, lost that one 31-3, dropping them to 2-3 on the season. We have our first NFL coach firing after Week 5. Jay Gruden gets called into the office Monday morning at 5 a.m. after their 33-7 loss to the New England Patriots, and he gets fired. I'm glad he got fired, being a Redskins fan. Bill Callahan taking over the coaching role for the rest of the season for the Washington Redskins, which I agree with. Bill Callahan has been in a head coaching position before, actually took the place of John Gruden in 2002, I believe, after he left and took the place for him. So what a coincidence there. So Bill Callahan, I'm hearing reports that he is changing the culture of the team in practice so far, laying down the law, as J.P. Finlay of NBC Sports Washington tweeted out earlier today. But the Redskins, they still have a lot to work on. Bruce Allen, still, I don't think he's getting the job done. He should have been fired too. Greg Minuski's still on staff. What's that defense done for the team this year? Absolutely nothing. I think it's time to look long run for the Washington Redskins. I feel like they should go ahead, trade Josh Norman, trade Trent Williams, since he's not doing a darn thing. He's still sitting out after Jay Gruden got fired. And I think they need to stockpile up on draft picks and prepare for the future. It's going to be a rough couple years for the Redskins. And Dan Snyder, it's not going to happen, but I wish he just sells the team. So a lot of drama, a lot of controversy in Washington. And guess what? Week 6, they're playing the 0-4 Miami Dolphins. So the people are calling this on social media the Tank Bowl. And fun fact, the Redskins-Dolphins game, you can get tickets for that cheaper than you can tickets for the Miami Zoo. So fun fact for you all there. The Redskins have a lot to work on. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to take up too much time on my Redskins, but it's going to be a long, rough road ahead. But I'm excited to see what Bill Callahan can do for the Redskins as interim head coach. Running down the official scoreboard for Week 5 before we wrap things up here. Seattle and Los Angeles beats Los Angeles 30-29. New England 33, Washington 7. Carolina over Jacksonville 34-27. Arizona over Cincinnati 26-23. Houston over Atlanta 53-32. New Orleans over Tampa Bay 31-24. Minnesota over the Giants 28-10. Oakland over Chicago 24-21. Philadelphia over the Jets 31-6. In overtime, the Ravens beat the Steelers 26-23. Buffalo over Tennessee 14-7. Denver, their first one of the season for head coach Vic Fangio, over the struggling Los Angeles Chargers 20-13. Green Bay 34, Dallas 24. And the Sunday night shocker, Jacoby Brissett in the Indianapolis Colts hand the Kansas City Chiefs their first loss of the season, 19-13, and what a game that was. Monday night for you, 31-3, the San Francisco 49ers over the Cleveland Browns. And one more last point, Pat Mahomes, this is a learning test for him and the Kansas City Chiefs. They're going through a rough patch. Lost their first game, almost lost to the Lions last week, but they're 4-1. They need to get back to playing football, and it's a learning experience. And Pat Mahomes is going to learn from this game, and I think they're going to come out better than ever. But the Colts are just playing good football, and they're just playing for one another. Like I said in a previous episode, Andrew Luck's gone, but they're playing for one another, and so far they're doing pretty good at 3-2. So Colts right there. And with the bye week this week, the Dolphins and the Lions. So, yep, that is my Week 5 recap for you. Short and sweet. We got a lot more to get into in a few segments down the road on this episode of the podcast. So, up next, Fantasy Football Files with Jason Kamlowski. He has a lot to get into this week, so I hope you enjoy his segment. When I return, we'll talk some playoff baseball and a Week 6 preview. You're listening to the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Football Files with the Josh Kirby podcast. Jason Kamlowski here again. I'm going to go over some stuff from Week 5, maybe preview a little bit of Week 6 stuff, go over, some guys that you can buy and sell in fantasy football this week. Just as always, you can find me at Jason Kamlowski on Twitter. Dynasty Football Digest, I'll have my buys and sells article up later this week for that. But just to kind of start off, we talked last week about some guys. One guy I definitely talked about was Will Fuller, and I said it last week, and I don't think this is rocket science what we're trying to figure out, but I kind of saw Will Fuller's week coming. I don't think I was alone. I think a lot of people saw a blow up week from Will Fuller coming. I don't think anybody saw him, going off for 53 points or whatever it was in a PPR. But when you go back and look at between game script and between just watching some of the film and then looking at some of the air yards numbers, Fuller was due for like that big game. And nobody could ever imagine he would go for 50 points. But the week before, Deshaun Watson had missed him on like a 75-yard touchdown pass, which, if they complete that pass, that's like a league-winning play because that's worth like 14 points in a PPR league. And, his final stat line would look significantly better that week. And, people would probably be off of him, because it would just be kind of one of those ho-hum things where, he finishes with like 120 yards on 5 catches and a touchdown. Obviously Fuller going for what he did was just... absolute, just, wildest, crazy ceiling game you can imagine. The 14 catches, 217 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's just a crazy blow-up game from Will Fuller. It was like the 9th best game all time from a fantasy wide receiver. But again, when you look at these guys, especially at the receiver position, guys that maybe you want to look at investing in and redraft, this area, I cannot speak highly enough of airyards.com because it is such a good predictor of future success of some of these guys. In weeks whenever they have, a lot of air yards, but maybe don't convert those catches, because, typically if they, obviously the further down the field the target is, the less likely it's going to be that the ball is going to be caught. You throw Julian Edelman, 10 balls within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, he's probably going to catch 8 or 9 of them. But if you throw Josh Gordon, 6 balls 30 yards down the field, he might come down with 2 or 3 of them, and, hopefully. So, but those long distance targets is really, that's sometimes things we want to invest in because those are the high quality targets that score us a lot of points. So Fuller was kind of like a no-brainer for me to try to invest in, and I've got him in a couple leagues, definitely in a couple dynasty leagues. I have him just because I think he's legitimately good. I thought in college he was legitimately good. He played at Notre Dame, and he's fast. His route tree is not crazy, but he can get behind the defense on any given play. And I just think Will Fuller is a legitimately good, NFL wide receiver. So he was kind of like a big no-brainer. on the buy list from last week, and I hope some of you are able to take advantage of that and either go out and get him, whether it was through trade or whether it's through. I mean, it's not some leagues he might have on the waiver wire or whatever it was, and I hope you jammed him in your lineups because he was definitely a guy that I was looking at. But last week was just a crazy scoring week in the NFL from a fantasy standpoint. If you play daily fantasy on like DraftKings, FanDuel, Fantasy Draft, whatever it is. I think the guy that won the Millie Maker on DraftKings had like 320 total points, which is just an insane number. I mean, normally, the winning week is like between 280 and 290. But, you get like these crazy ceiling games from like Deshaun Watson and Fuller and, Christian McCaffrey had a 50-burger. And then you got like the Eagles defense scoring like 39 points. And you could fit all those guys on a roster pretty easily. I mean, Fuller's price was way down, even though, McCaffrey and Deshaun Watson's price was up. So you could definitely fit those guys on a roster. And I would say there's a lot of people in redraft leagues that probably had those three guys, rostered and possibly even had like a Dalvin Cook or a Marlon Mack to go with that. Possibly had like DJ Shark to go with that. I just had a crazy week. So just a really, really high scoring week. A lot of 100-yard rushers, a lot of multiple touchdown guys. Looking at some of the quarterback numbers, I mean, Dak Prescott from a real life standpoint was really, really bad. But for fantasy purposes, 463 and 2 touchdowns would get it done pretty much every time, despite the 3 interceptions. So unless you play in the league, it's just, crazy penalties for, quarterbacks turn the ball. I mean, Dak Prescott had like a big time, like league winning week for you. Gardner Minshew continues to be one of the best, stories and waiver wire pickups in fantasy football and real life football too. But threw the ball 44 times, which really is uncharacteristic of him. I think he had not topped 33 in his first 3 games. I mean, so to throw the ball 44 times, that's probably where you're going to get like kind of one of those blow up games where he goes for as many yards as he did. But he's just been so steady. Anytime you get a guy on the waiver wire like that, I mean, you got to be happy with anything you get. But if you started Gardner Minshew last week, obviously you're really, really happy with what he did. Matt Ryan, another 300-yard game. Tom Brady shredded the Redskins, who didn't see that coming. Teddy Bridgewater, great game, good for him down in New Orleans, filling in for Drew Brees. I mean, they've not really missed too much of a beat without Brees. I think the interesting thing with them is like they're kind of okay winning ugly, right? I mean, it seems like with Breeze, like they want to put up style points or try to get cute sometimes. But, with Bridgewater, they're just taking what the defense gives them. I mean, they're running the ball some weeks, they're throwing the ball some weeks. But happy for Teddy Bridgewater, especially after that horrific injury. And, even in, a backup role coming in and being able to, get some numbers and win some football games for New Orleans is really cool. 2 guys I want to talk about, though. Pat Mahomes, who, as Pat Mahomes goes, 321 yards and 1 touchdown is not exactly what we expect. And Russell Wilson, who, 268 yards and 4 touchdowns on just 23 attempts. I mean, this guy is just crazy efficient, and if they would ever just unleash him and let him throw the ball, even 30 times a game, I mean, this guy would probably lead the league in passing. But let's start with Mahomes because he's kind of had, some duds here in the past couple of weeks, which I'm shocked by because I just don't really think there's any way that you can, harness him. But, I mean, Kansas City had a great game plan the other night. And, obviously, whenever you don't have Sammy Watkins out there and you're throwing to a trio of receivers and, Byron Pringle and Demarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman, those at some point, those things will catch up to you, I think, as a quarterback. Byron Pringle led them in receiving yards and catches, and I think even targets the other night, which most of that stuff was probably supposed to go to Sammy Watkins before he got the hamstring injury right before the game. But when you're working with like a guy like Pringle, who's an undrafted free agent out of Texas, you're not going to be quite as explosive as you were with Tyreek Hill and Sammy Watkins and Travis Kelce lining up, offensively. So, but the thing that worries me a little bit about Mahomes, I mean, his last 2 weeks he's been under 60% the completion percentage. I mean, he's just not looked great. And I know he's a little banged up right now with the ankle, which is giving him problems. And I know he's getting treatment for that, right now. But, the Chiefs face a Texans team that they should be able to do what they want to do with in the air. But if Mahomes struggles a little bit this week, I mean, you've got to be a little bit concerned as an owner, which is just, it's hard to believe you say that about Patrick Mahomes because, for most quarterbacks, 300 yards and a touchdown would be a pretty good week. But, for what we're used to seeing with Mahomes, multiple touchdowns and, even 350 yards plus, and that's like a normal week for him. I think it just, goes to show like how high the bar is. If you're a Mahomes owner. So, I mean, obviously no time to really panic on him. I mean, you probably paid a pretty hefty price for him to, if you have him. So it's not like I'm going to bench Patrick Mahomes anytime soon, but, definitely something to keep an eye on. And then, going back to Russell Wilson, I mean, just like I said, the efficiency is nuts. For a guy, I think he's only had one game this year where like he really had to throw, more than I think like 30 passes. And I think that was against New Orleans, he threw 50 passes, which, he threw for 400 yards that game. And then he threw 35 passes against Pittsburgh. But, he's completing passes right now at a 73% clip. And he has yet to throw an interception this week. Now watch, he'll throw one this week, but he has yet to throw an interception this season. I mean, Russ has just been lights out, and good for him. I mean, Russ seems like a guy who kind of does the right things. Been some reports maybe he's a questionable teammate or whatever, but got to be happy with Russell Wilson. Just looking at some other big performances. Christian McCaffrey just continues to just do his thing. I mean, he's a wide receiver one and RB1. We say it every week, but it's true. I mean, he is. He's just absolutely a monster. Dalvin Cook, another 100-yard game. Of course, Minnesota wants to establish a run. Marlon Mack with a ridiculous game the other night, which is absurd. I didn't even play him on the showdown slate, which was just, because, I'm thinking the Chiefs are going to have to have a big lead. I'm thinking Nyheim Hines, they're going to throw the ball. Nah. Marlon Mack, 132 yards. Thanks for coming out. He had a run, and I've watched it a couple times. He had like 3 jump cuts in a run, like on this run, that were just nuts. I mean, he's pretty nimble for a quote unquote power back. I mean, I like Marlon Mack's game a lot. But I was shocked to see him get 29 carries for 132 yards. But that's what you get whenever you're trying to hold on to a lead in the second half. Josh Jacobs, another guy that surprises with 123 yards and 2 touchdowns against that really good Chicago defense. I mean, the Bears are just a mess. They having a hard time stopping people. Chase Daniel in there, scoring's a struggle, and Trubisky's not very good. I mean, Bears, I just don't see how they beat New Orleans or the Rams or the Seahawks. I just don't see how they're going to be able to do that because they're going to have to travel in that divisional round, and I don't see any way that they're able to beat those teams. And they may not even be able to beat the Packers to win the division. I mean, the Packers right now look pretty good. So, Chris Carson, who I'm a big fan of, another 100-yard game. Matt Breida, man, he's unbelievable. Had a big 83-yard touchdown run last night. That was kind of his biggest play of the night, but he averaged 10 yards a carry and had a touchdown. Philip Lindsay still doing his thing. I know it's kind of a timeshare in Denver, but I'm still a Philip Lindsay believer. He's not going to necessarily be in my buy article, but he's definitely someone, if you can get him, at a discount, he's someone I would get. Leonard Fournette with another 100-yard game. Aaron Jones, 4 touchdowns on the ground, 107 yards. And I said last week, Aaron Jones, after the Dallas game, might be a guy you want to look at selling. And I think now's the time. The window's probably wide open, and you can probably get a mint for him. Still, not getting 20, somehow not getting 20 carries, even though the Packers were up by like 21 points, 28 points at one point. But I think now's the time. If you're going to move him, because, if they get Devontae Adams back and they get a couple of these guys in the backfield back, I mean, if he drops back down to being like a 15 to 17 touch guy, you're going to wish you moved him this week. So maybe go out and see what you can get. Not telling you how to run your team, but maybe go see what you can get. And then from the receiver standpoint, Mark Cooper, big game. Of course, Dallas played from behind pretty much afternoon. Fuller, 3 touchdown catches. Already talked about him. Michael Thomas, blow-up game, 11 for $182 and 2 touchdowns. Talked about DJ Shark a little bit, and we'll mention him a little bit more when we talk about guys to maybe look at trying to get on your roster. But he's been another air yards guy. Adam Thielen busted out. Chris Godwin, who's the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy right now. 7 catches, 125, 2 touchdowns. Mike Evans had 0 catches on Sunday. Let me say it again. Mike Evans had 0 catches on Sunday. I think Chris Godwin is the wide receiver 1 in New Orleans. I don't think there's any question about that. Seems like Bruce Arians really likes what he brings to the table. And I don't think it's one of those situations where he's like 1B even. I think he is the wide receiver 1. I think Evans is the wide receiver 2. And I think that's what we need to get used to in Tampa Bay. Cooper Kupp, another big game this week. If you got Cooper Kupp in like the 5th round, you've got to love what Cooper Kupp is bringing with you right now. I mean, he's got a big-time red zone market share. He's returned crazy value. I do think regression is going to hit him at some point. Michael Gallup, he had another big game again. Dallas plays from behind, though. Edelman, 110 yards. I mean, they just shredded Washington. Like I said, I didn't see that coming. Allen Robinson, 2 touchdown catches this week. Played Cortland Sutton on the late slate on DraftKings. He rewarded me with 4 for 92 and a touchdown. He had a big touchdown catch early in the game. I was hoping for a bigger game than what I actually got from him, though. Played Calvin Ridley this week, too. Thought he had a chance to score. He did, 5 for 88 and a touchdown. And this guy's a running back, but this is probably the craziest stat line of the week. Austin Eckler, 15 catches, 86 yards. It just seemed like they were kind of using him just all over the formation, and they were perfectly content. Phillip Rivers was just content to just dump it down. And to Denver's credit, they just let it happen. But he averaged 5.7 yards a catch. That is just wild. So, some interesting names on this list, though, and some guys I think that, we're starting to see, like, tight end like George Kittle had a touchdown last night finally. So he was able to kind of break out a little bit. Gerald Everett, for the Rams, 7 catches, 136 yards against Seattle. That's kind of where you can attack Seattle, is right there in the middle of the field. That's also why Cooper Kupp had such a good game. So if you're looking at matchups, and if you're like a matchup guy, Seattle can be beat over the middle of their defense. So, like the Browns this week, I mean, I would think Jarvis Landry would be in play for the Browns this week. Just kind of talking about some things like that. But let's talk about a few things with maybe some guys that we might want to be looking to get onto our redraft rosters. And I think the first name for me that kind of pops up, we talked about DJ Shark and we talked about Gardner Minshew, but I think D.D. Westbrook, target shares are healthy, receptions, especially in a PPR, I think Westbrook could be valuable. And he's not really, I think he's probably disappointed most fantasy owners at this point. I think they expected more out of him. So I think, looking at D.D. Westbrook and just some of the underlying stat issues, the air yards are healthy for D.D. Westbrook. So he's not running like, those 30 and 40 yard patterns down the field, but he is getting a decent enough target depth to where he can be he can return value. The thing with him is, and it seems like him and Minshew kind of have probably a better connection than him and Foles even did, but over the last week, or out of the last 3 weeks, 5 for 46, 5 for 66, and then 7 for 82. In a PPR, that'll play all day. So if you, I would say this is more of a PPR buy situation. But I think, D.D. Westbrook could be a guy that I would certainly look at maybe, going out and trying to invest in, depending on what the price would be. Another guy to look at, and this was kind of perplexing a little bit. Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And when Devontae Adams was not going to play, I thought Valdez-Scantling was like the perfect pivot to Devontae Adams, right? I mean, I would have started him across every format, and one catch for 18 yards. That's just tragic, especially when you look. He only had 4 targets, but on those 4 targets, he had 106 air yards. So he averaged over 26 air yards per target. I mean, his ADOT was 26.4 yards, which was like third on the slate on the Sunday slate. So, and it's gonna be tough with him because I don't know that the targets are always going to be there, but if he's another guy that will give you these ceiling weeks, and I don't think the price will be so prohibitive that you may not want to pay the freight. So, depending on what your wide receiver situation looks like, he might be a guy worth kicking the tires on to make like a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, or even a flex play. So, I think he would probably be my number one buy on the week, just given all the peripheral numbers I'm looking at here. Another guy is Darius Slayton. Sterling Shepard's already been ruled out for Thursday. Evan Ingram looks like he's iffy to play. Obviously, Saquon's not going to play, which basically leaves, Darius Slayton and Cody Lattimore to kind of hold it down with the Giants' receiving core. And Slayton, he's getting targets from Danny Jones, and they're quality targets. The air yards are good. Like I said, that's kind of what we're going by here. The air yards are good. 4 catches, 60 yards. Did find the end zone last week. Another guy, I don't know that he's going to be super cost prohibitive in a redraft. He might even be on the waiver wire, depending on how sharp your league mates are. He's another guy, though, I wouldn't hesitate to either try to trade for or definitely make a waiver priority. And then just looking at one more receiver, and this, again, I always like to go hunting for whales. Odell Beckham Jr. He's been not very good, but over the course of his career, he has been a fairly slow starter over the course of his career. Obviously with switching teams this year, that might be, an outlier as far as how things are going. But I do think he presents an interesting case to buy low on because he's been absolutely terrible. He has probably cost teams a lot of wins. If you get a team that's 2-3 or 3-2, and they're looking to maybe make that move, I think Odell Beckham would be a terrific buy low candidate right now. I will always, always, always bet on talent. I think Beckham has a ton of it. And if it's me and I can get what was, just probably 30 days ago or so, 6 weeks ago, a top 5 player for maybe a second round price, then that's what I would be looking to do, because that's how, I think that's how you build a roster to win. And I think it's just a matter of time before we're talking about Odell Beckham Jr. ripping off like 2 or 3 of these like major ceiling games for him. So he would be probably my biggest buy as far as just going, hunting for whales as opposed to just going for minnows. From a running back standpoint, and this is tough because this is all about opportunity. But I think Joe Mixon, and he kind of landed on the list last week, so I think Joe Mixon would be on there again for me. And again, this is kind of like the Odell Beckham thing. Ezekiel Howard or Ezekiel Elliott. He's not really performed. He's been adequate, but if you've invested a draft pick in him like you probably have, adequate's not going to cut it. You need significantly more than adequate. And, the touch numbers are not bad. He's not necessarily getting the number of receptions he was last year. He's on pace for about 40 catches, which is far below where he was at last year. I think some of this might be him working himself back into shape because he sat out most of camp. But, he kind of got game flowed out last week, and I honestly thought he was kind of game flow proof because of the role in the passing game he has. But that's obviously right now anyways not the case. But again, just like with Beckham, I'm more than willing to try to bet on the talent with Ezekiel Elliott, which means I would be more than willing to make some offer for Ezekiel Elliott, depending on who the owner is and what they need. And again, I think this is how you win in fantasy. You go after these guys like this who are just tremendous talents, but maybe have not performed quite up to where they should. I think Elliott presents a fascinating case in that, and I think it might take the right owner to go and say, hey, what would you want for him? But there are probably people getting fed up. I know in at least a couple leagues that I'm in, he went number 1 overall, and this just isn't what you expect from number 1 overall player, barring injury. So, go out, kick the tires a little bit on Zeke Elliott and just see what the price is. It never hurts to ask. The worst they can tell you is no. So I would definitely be kicking the tires on him. And Le'Veon Bell is the other one that I would be looking at. His role, he's getting the touches with Sam Darnold hopefully coming back sooner than later. It looks like there might be an opportunity there for Lev Bell to, kind of get going. Luke Falk's not going to take that offense anywhere, so I don't necessarily blame Le'Veon Bell for kind of the struggles he's had. But, when you go in and you look at his game logs and you look at, the touch count, 22 catches last week, or 22 touches total last week with 7 receptions. 22 touches a week before that was 4 receptions. 31 touches a week before that was 6 receptions, and 23 touches a week before that was 6 receptions. So he is on a good pace. Honestly, he's on a 100 catch pace right now. And he's doing it pretty quietly because he's only on pace to have, roughly like 1,400 yards total. That's not rushing, that's total. But, when Darnold gets back, I would think that would open some things up for him as well with the running game too, even though that offensive line is just terrible. But the touch counts are right there for Le'Veon Bell, so I would definitely be looking to buy in on him, especially when you look at, kind of the upcoming schedule for him. This week, he gets the Cowboys, which obviously they just got shredded by Aaron Jones. So this could be a get well point this week for Le'Veon Bell. Moving on to quarterback, and again, this is so tough with quarterback to kind of figure out who you want to buy, because I think quarterback's just one of those things where it kind of levels off. But I think you could look at, maybe see where the Aaron Rodgers owner is. Again, he probably paid a premium for Aaron Rodgers. So maybe look and see where he's at, and see, what you can offer up for him. Maybe, again, this is all about trying to find a little bit of a discount. So maybe you get Aaron Rodgers on the cheap, and he gets things going. I've got my doubts about that because I still just don't fully trust Matt LaFleur. But I do think Aaron Rodgers is worth kicking the tires on. And I think even maybe like a Carson Wentz could be another guy. Him and Phillip Rivers, they're both just kind of plodding along right now. But, we know with Wentz that he's got enough talent to where, he can win you some weeks with some of the things he's going to do. Don't have those blow-up weeks where he throws 3 or 4 touchdown passes. So I think Carson Wentz is another guy that I would definitely look at buying. And then, as we move into guys that I would look to sell, I think with the quarterback position, it's going to be tough unless you're in a 2-quarterback league to really sell a quarterback, just because in most leagues you're going to find somebody reasonable on the waiver wire. But if you do play in one of those 2-quarterback leagues, I do think the guy that I would probably be looking to sell more than anybody, like right at this moment, would probably be Matt Ryan, just because I think, he's running off this consecutive streak of 300-yard games, and it's not going to last. But again, you could probably get a decent return from Matt Ryan, but it's probably going to have to be part of a bigger package. It seems like with quarterbacks, most sharp players aren't going to trade for a quarterback just because they know what's on the waiver wire. It's not something I ever do. If I need a quarterback for a bye week fill-in, I just go to the waiver wire and pick up who's there. So it's kind of hard for me to recommend a quarterback, person to buy, like with in good conscience here. So, when we go down through and we talk about some of these other players, it's just one of those things. I want you guys to have a realistic shot at, being able to get somebody. So at the running back position, some guys maybe you're looking to sell right now. It might be too late to sell David Johnson. He's got that back injury. I thought he was going to go off last week. He did not. I've already talked to Aaron Jones. I think he's a huge sell right now. And honestly, and I hate to say this, but Dalvin Cook, because I just think he's got a good chance of being injured again. And if you've handcuffed him, that's fine. But if you haven't, you could probably get a really good return for him right now. And I think that's something that is viable. And as far as sells go with the wide receiver position, and again, it's hard for me to recommend some of this stuff because, receiver is just such an important part of what these teams are doing now. But, Adam Thielen would be the one that comes to mind for me. He just kind of had a blow-up game, but he's playing in an offense where Mike Zimmer wants to run the ball. So, you're coming off a game where he had 7 for $130 and 2 touchdowns. Go out and sell him. See what you can get for him. See if you can get someone to bite and nibble at that and, get a decent return for Adam Thielen. So, just some ideas. Those are some ideas this week, for buys and sells. And I know, some of this stuff is fluid and I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel when I give you guys these things, but, I'm happy to answer these questions for anybody. If you just shoot me something on Twitter, I answered a couple questions today. People were looking at trade targets. I had one guy that just asked me about, maybe moving Mike Evans for Travis Kelce, which I said, I thought that was a fantastic idea if he could make a move. Shoot me those ideas. We can talk through it. Obviously the goal is to try to get you the best deal as possible. But, as always, I appreciate Josh letting me come on the podcast. And, I wish you guys all best of luck in week 6. And we'll be back here next week, to look at some things from week 7. But hopefully you guys all get a win this week. You can catch me on Twitter at Jason Kamlowski. Look for my buy-sell article on Dynasty Football Digest later this week. Thanks, guys.
The Josh Kirby on Sports podcast, part of the Mayo Please podcast network, is sponsored by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you grab a bag today inside your local Martin's, Food Lion, and Giant stores. And our new sponsor and fellow sports fans at PM Plus Reserves, providing reserve studies for homeowner and condominium associations in the Washington metropolitan area for the past 30 years. Make sure you check us out on all streaming platforms via the Mayo Please and the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. You can also find the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, along with the Mayo Please on Twitter. Have any questions for the show? Feel free to shoot us an email at kirbyonsports@gmail.com.
Alrighty, back with you on the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. Thanks once again to Jason Kamlowski, as always, for producing Fantasy Football Files. And thank you to MPT Now Productions. As always, we're back. As always, we're part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network, brought to you by Route 11 Chips and PM Plus Reserves. Getting back into it here, the MLB postseason has kicked off, and we'll give you a little bit of an update on that. I'll set the bracket for you. The wild card games, as we're recording this, have been completed already. The Nationals and the Brewers on the National League side, and on the American League, the Oakland Athletics facing the Tampa Bay Rays. I was fortunate enough to cover the wild card game. I had the opportunity to go to the game, and what a game that was. Started off early. Milwaukee just hit a home run and drove in a few runs. It was 2-0 for the most part of this ball game. Then the Nationals put up 1 run in the 3rd inning, so ended up 3-1 after the Brewers drove in another run in the 2nd inning. And then it all happened in the 8th inning when Juan Soto came up to bat with bases loaded, the 20-year-old machine. in my opinion. He is a machine. He hit a line drive to the right fielder. Yes, right fielder. Just want to make sure I get my left and right not confused. But anyways, to the right fielder. The right fielder ends up not being able to scoop up the ball. It gets under him, and the Nationals take the lead because of it. And Juan Soto did get tagged out, but that was because so Anthony Rendon could score and take the lead. They ended up bringing Daniel Hudson in to finish off the game, and he got the 3 outs needed. And the Washington Nationals, for the first time, advanced in the playoffs from the wild card to the NLDS. And on the other side, the American League, Tampa Bay puts a pounding on Oakland 5-1, and Oakland, once again, heartbreak for them in the playoffs as they do not move on. So we have a lot of games to cover after those wild card games. It's Washington and the Los Angeles Dodgers playing a clincher game. They're tied at 2 and going to Los Angeles after Washington getting the job done off of a Ryan Zimmerman 3-run shot 2 nights ago. Or was it last night? Yeah, last night. Excuse me. Yes, last night. But they're going into Los Angeles, and Steven Strasburg is on the mound for the Washington Nationals. They're tied at 2 along with the Atlanta Braves and the St. Louis Cardinals, both in the NL, both series decision makers to move on. And the Nats, if they win, they could see the Braves or the Cardinals. So would the Dodgers, but the Nats and the Braves would be a key matchup if the Nats were to move on in this series. But they've played pretty good so far, the Nats. They haven't been like in years past with other managers getting, upset. The same thing every year. The Nats can't get out of a division series. And Davey Martinez has surprised a lot of people, especially in Game 2. I want to say Game 2 when they put Scherzer in to relieve. In relief, it was very stunning for us Nats fans to see, and just anybody on the news in general, just to see it. And like Dave Martinez is treating every game as it's the Nationals' last game. So I like the sense of urgency, the sense of control that Martinez is bringing as a manager. And so far he's gotten the Nats to this point, and I think the Dodgers have a lot to be scared of. But yet again, you have that in years past, the Nationals have been heartbroken year and year again. They lost Dusty Baker last year because they couldn't get out of the division series. They lost Matt Williams, couldn't get out of the division series. So is it going to be the same story yet again for the Washington Nationals, or are they going to actually move on to the next round? Atlanta and St. Louis, they're playing a really tough series too. Back and forth games. There was a walk-off. St. Louis had a walk-off and tied the series, essentially. The Braves almost had a comeback game in one of the series games. So very close, very tight series for them. On the American League side, the Yankees swept the Twins. No doubt about it there. Yankees are one of the contenders along with the Houston Astros. They're leading that series, 2-2. And that's on Thursday. Their game against the Rays, that's going to be a decision maker as well. So a lot to look forward to. The Yankees clinched their championship series, and it's going to be determined whether they play Houston or Tampa Bay. If it's Houston, that's going to be a dogfight, in my opinion, because the Yankees have been hot for a while now, and the Houston Astros have a great pitching staff in Justin Verlander, in my opinion. And yeah, if it's the Yankees and the Astros, it's going to be a tough series. But if the Tampa Bay Rays come out of that and they end up moving forward to the World Series, it's going to be well-earned for the Tampa Bay Rays. But in my opinion, it's either going to be the Yankees or the Astros out of the AL, and it's really close in the NL. If the Nats come out and they can make it to a championship series and give either the Cardinals or the Braves a shot, it's going to be incredible for DC. I'm not going to go too far and say, yeah, how about the Nationals? They're going to do what the Caps did and win a championship, and Washington will get electric. I'm not going that far. I'm just saying if the Nationals can get out of this series with the Dodgers, they're going to put up a fight. And I think this team will be a different team than in years past when they get heartbroken. It's the same story every year. Can't get out of the division series. Cannot get out of the division series. They're looking championship series, and I think Dave Martinez and his coaching staff are going to be really, really aggressive in LA. So it's going to be interesting to see. And like I said earlier, the Braves and the Cardinals have a decision game as well. That's a playoff update for you. We'll keep you updated in future episodes. And rounding out the show, last but not least, a Week 6 preview. Starting off Thursday night, you have the New England Patriots 5-0 facing the New York Giants. The Patriots coming off a short week, easy game against the Redskins. Giants short week loss against the Vikings. As people might say, the Tank Bowl, Washington goes to Miami. Tickets are cheaper than the Miami Zoo. Carolina and Tampa Bay. You got another division matchup, the Ravens and the Bengals. Seattle and Cleveland. New Orleans and Jacksonville. Houston and Kansas City. Philadelphia and Minnesota. Kirk Cousins facing another NFC East opponent. The Atlanta Falcons and the Arizona Cardinals, 1-4 versus 1-3-1. San Francisco playing the LA Rams. That will be a matchup to watch. The Rams have been struggling, dropped 2 straight. The 49ers are undefeated. That's going to be a game to watch, 4 or 5 slot on Fox. 4:25, Tennessee playing Denver. 4:25, Dallas playing the Jets. Sunday night, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Los Angeles Chargers. And Monday night, a great division matchup between the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions with the Buffalo Bills, Chicago Bears, Indianapolis Colts, and Oakland Raiders on a Week 6 bye. So that about wraps up this edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. As always, thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate all the support so far. You know where to find us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on YouTube, Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can find us, the Mayo Please, or the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. As always, thank you to Dave Johnson, Rad 11 Chips, PM Plus Reserves, and MPT Now Productions. And until the next episode, this is Josh Kirby saying so long and peace out.